Last week, Trump was bombing Iran. This week, Trump announces he's ready to end the war with Iran. So why is everyone in the media and political establishment calling him Taco? Greetings from Semillas, an independent working class think tank and action center. And this is our weekly news and review broadcast for the week of June 15 through 21, 2026. Donald Trump announces a plan to sign an MOU, a Memo of Understanding, this Friday to achieve a peace treaty with Iran over the next several months. That's an agreement to make an agreement. It will be complicated negotiations, but basically revolves around Iran promising not to develop a nuclear weapon in the future in return for the U.S. ending the war and lifting crushing economic sanctions against Iran that have been in place for years. This war, which has cost thousands of lives and hundreds of billions of dollars in destruction, may now be settled peacefully. Yet leaders from both Democratic and Republican parties are calling this a disaster. And many ridicule Trump by calling him Taco. Trump always chickens out. What these so-called experts fail to acknowledge is that achieving a potential military victory over Iran would require over 500,000 U.S. troops for a ground invasion of Iran and potentially lead to nuclear warfare. So please note, what you are seeing in this criticism of a peace treaty throughout the mainstream media are the warmongers, the warhawks in both parties trying to sabotage a potential peace deal. These people that are actually trying to instigate an end to this peace process. These people represent the 1% running this nation who consistently support policies of war and military intervention, as opposed to the 90% of the working class Americans who are against constant war and aggression. The official MOU is to be signed this Friday, but there are no guarantees that a peace treaty will result from this. However, President Donald Trump acknowledged this week that this war was leading to a world economic catastrophe. In related news, Trump has invoked the Defense Production Act to resupply the military with the thousands of missiles used against Iran during the war. 1/2 of all Patriot missiles and 80% of all THAAD missiles have been depleted. These are the most important and costly type of missiles used to protect U.S. forces, and it could take up to 6 years to resupply. If a war broke out with China over Taiwan, the U.S. would be in deep manure. On another front, Trump has moved on to the Group of 7 nations, which is the top European nations, along with the U.S., Canada, and Japan. They're meeting in Europe, where he is, you'll never believe this, advancing another peace treaty, one between Russia and Ukraine. Is he still trying to win the Nobel Peace Prize? Remember that Trump touted himself as the peace president not long ago when he was reelected. And boy, did that go haywire. At the same time, the U.S. has announced that it is increasing military aid to Ukraine. Moving on in the news, there are all sorts of economic indicators suggesting that, in part due to the war, we are facing serious problems. The Producer Price Index increased by 6.5% annually, and this rapid acceleration of wholesale prices indicates that retail prices for U.S. consumers across the board will be greatly impacted over the next few months. New residential housing production, according to the Commerce Department, has hit a major recent low, and builder sentiment for future continues to decline. 13% of all credit card holders are now 90 days late, an all-time high delinquency rate since the Great Recession. Student loan delinquency rates have spiked to 25%. 1 in 4 borrowers, 12 million borrowers are behind in their payments, and nearly 9 million have defaulted on their student loans. There's all sorts of indicators that the U.S. economy is under significant stress. So stop saying taco. And this brings up the K-shaped economy that you are increasingly seeing in the news. While the 0.01% are becoming richer than ever, 60% of the U.S. population are having a really hard time just trying to make ends meet. However, a significant amount of new billionaires have been created this past week through the SpaceX initial public stock offering, with Elon Musk becoming the first trillionaire ever. Hooray! As the world's first trillionaire, his wealth is now much greater than the GDPs, the gross domestic products, of 90% of all nations on Earth. We can hardly wait for the upcoming IPOs for Anthropic and OpenAI, right? Switching over to California news, the primary elections are now over, we think. California, standing on its own, as Governor Gavin Newsom proudly proclaims, would be the 5th largest economy in the world, just behind Japan and ahead of the United Kingdom. And as a one-party state run by the Democratic Party, you'd think the working class would be swimming in luxury, right? However, California has the highest poverty rate in the nation, and 25% of the entire homeless population lives in California. And this week, unfortunately, the most important homeless agency in the state, the Los Angeles Housing Services Agency, LAHSA, with a budget of $850 million, was defunded by the Housing and Urban Development Agency for the vast fraud that has emerged in the running of this agency under Mayor Karen Bass, where numerous criminal investigations are continuing to this date. Remember that last year, Governor Gavin Newsom reported in a press conference that $24 billion had been expended in California to address the homeless problem in the state, and that there was no evidence of how this money had been spent. But he did promise to get down to the bottom of this matter. Unfortunately, he wound up vetoing a bipartisan bill in the Sacramento state legislature that would have investigated this matter. And this week, Governor Gavin Newsom had a press conference to denounce the news that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is investigating Newsom and his wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, for enriching themselves by using the political process. Newsom blames this investigation on, you guessed it, Donald Trump, although various corruption investigations have surfaced out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Sacramento. Not being disputed is the fact that Siebel Newsom and her nonprofit have received over $4 million during Newsom's term that were funneled through the governor's influence, and this would have been orchestrated through Newsom's chief of staff, Dana Williamson, who has now pleaded guilty to fraud by creating a conduit scheme to launder political money. And some of this money came from, get this, an account belonging to the leading governor candidate, Javier Becerra, from his campaign funds. Becerra is running on his supposed competency of having run a multi-billion-dollar government agency, the Health and Human Services Division of Government, but he claims he had no idea what was going on in his own bank account. Furthermore, a key subject of an upcoming governor's race will be Becerra's oversight under the Joe Biden administration of billions and billions of dollars that are now being asserted to have been misspent in numerous fraud schemes involving fake hospice billing schemes and Medicare fraud. Keep in mind that one of Becerra's campaign promises is to reinstate free healthcare coverage for several million undocumented residents, which cost California $9 billion annually and was discontinued due to budget shortfalls. The 5th largest economy in the world is beginning to resemble one big Ponzi scheme. Massive government spending and nothing to show for it besides the political insiders getting rich. We hope that this becomes the central focus in California's upcoming governor's race. It turns out that too many people are using these budgets to enrich themselves, from Sacramento right down to our local city and school districts, and there's no one there to protect us. America is at a crossroads, and the working class has no hopes for political leadership coming from the two parties that created this mess in the first place. Democrats and Republicans, the parties of war and destruction, the parties serving the financial oligarchy. Semillas is a working class think tank and action center. Our goal is to provide you with the information and education you need to become a better leader in your own community, and together we, the majority of this nation will forge a new path forward. Please stay with us. Like, subscribe, contact us, and help us financially sustain this path forward. And until next week, this has been the Semillas News and Review. And stop saying taco.
Semillas Community Center is a working-class think tank and action center. We have a plan, sowing the seeds of transformation.